This is Dr. Yavuz Selim Sılay. I'm your host at 5TN. Welcome to another 5TN, where we hear one of the very interesting and top technology news around the world. Our first news is about an Indian politician. It's very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, an Indian politician is using deepfake technology to win new voters. So this is extremely interesting, and we'll get into the detail of this news. Our other news is about in medical device. Why fixing security vulnerabilities in medical device, especially the Internet of Things, is so hard. We will talk about that. And also the scientists. There is a very interesting work they have done. They built a robot snake that could help in disaster response. So this is the coverage that I will do today. The first one is about this Indian politician, which I was very interested. That's why I wanted to share with you.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you.
This Indian politician is using deepfake technology to win new voters. I don't know if anyone has thought about it, but using deepfake technology to winning new voters is becoming a new trend. A deepfake of the president of India's ruling party, BJP, Manoj Tiwari, went viral on WhatsApp in the country ahead of legislative assembly elections in Delhi, according to Vice. It's the first time a political party anywhere has used a deepfake for campaigning purposes. In the original video, Tiwari speaks in English, criticizing his political opponent Arvind Kejriwal and encouraging voters to vote for BJP. The second video has been manipulated using deepfake technology, so his mouth moves convincingly as he speaks in Haryanvi, the Hindi dialect spoken by the target voters for BJP. The purpose? The BJP has partnered with political communications firm The Ideas Factory to create deepfakes that let it target voters across the over 20 different languages used in India. The party told Vice that the Tiwari deepfake reached approximately 15 million people in 5,800 WhatsApp groups. So this is actually causing alarm. This isn't the first time deepfakes have popped up during a political campaign. For example, in December 2019, researchers made a fake video of the two candidates in the United Kingdom's general election endorsing each other. It wasn't supposed to sway the vote, however, merely to raise awareness about deepfake technology. This case in India seems to be the first time deepfakes have been actually used for a political campaign. The big risk is that we reach a point where people can no longer trust what they see or hear. In that scenario, a video wouldn't even need to be digitally altered for people to denounce it as fake. It's not hard to imagine the corrosive impact that would have on an already fragile political landscape. So that's why I find this very interesting, and after the event in UK where to raise this awareness, seeing actually an Indian politician doing and using it systematically in Delhi was very interesting. Of course, our next news is about medical devices. Many of you have in their hospitals or using at their home medical devices. And it has actually some security vulnerabilities. It is exposed to some threats. And the question is, why Internet of Things is so hard? Because it's not so easy to just patch or upgrade the medical devices. It is more than that. So how to overcome that is the question. The complex web of software and hardware components and their licensing schemes make it actually difficult for healthcare organizations to upgrade or patch systems that prove to be vulnerable. When your family opened up that brand new computer when you were a kid, you didn't think of all the third-party work that made typing in that first basic program possible. There once was a time when we didn't have to worry about which companies produced all the bits of licensed software or hardware that underpinned our computing experience. But recent malware attacks and other security events have shown just how much we need to care about the supply chain behind the technology we use every day. The Urgent 11 vulnerability, the subject of a Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency advisory issued last July. This was one of those events. It forces us to care because it affects multiple medical devices, and it serves as a demonstration of how the software component supply chain and availability of support can affect the ability of organizations to update devices to fix security bugs, especially in the embedded computing space. Urgent 11 is a vulnerability in the inter-peak networks at the TCP IP stack, the IPnet, which was licensed out to multiple vendors of embedded operating systems. IPnet also became the main networking stack in Wind River VxWorks until Wind River acquired Interpeak in 2006 and stopped supporting, and actually until that stage there was the acquisition of River Interpeak in 2006 and stopped supporting the IPnet, you may remember. And that time Wind River itself was acquired by Intel in 2009 and spun off in 2018. But the end of support didn't stop several other manufacturers from continuing to use IPnets actually were affected. So when critical bugs were discovered in IPnet, it set off a scare among the numerous medical device manufacturers that run it as part of their product build. The average medical or Internet of Things, IoT device, relies on multiple free software or open source utilities. These pieces of software are maintained by any number of third parties, often by just one or two people. In the case of Network Time Protocol, NTP, software that is in billions of devices, its code is maintained by a single person. And when the OpenSSL Heartbleed vulnerability came out back in 2014, the OpenSSL project had 2 developers working on it. While there are many more developers working on it now, the Heartbleed crisis is emblematic of what happens when we use free software in our devices. The software gets adapted, not actually really patched, and not really maintained on the device, and little benefit goes back to the project. This is what we call patch economics. Companies are under constant pressure to develop products and reduce expenses. So to save time to market and reduce costs, hardware manufacturers often build products using some reference designs. These designs come with board support packages, which contain the code and drivers needed to successfully install and run an operating system on the given design. Sometimes they also come with utilities to perform diagnostics, hardware debugging, or monitoring on the devices. But the board support package is not always updated to address vulnerabilities or newer operating systems. This is the case with many Android devices that continue to be used but don't get software updates because of kernel changes that the board support packages and drivers do not support. Oftentimes, the device manufacturers need to update these packages for every new version of an operating system. It then needs to rebuild the new version of its operating system and applications on top of it. Third-party components such as cameras or additional sensors also need to have their drivers updated. The amount of work needed to do this is very significant and requires a degree of testing similar to that of a brand new device. Large manufacturers such as Samsung are capable of absorbing the costs and are able to provide device updates at a very low price because they control many different market segments like the display, the memory, and etc. So Apple is also capable of providing these updates for a number of years because of its control of the supply chain behind its devices, including the processors, and its move away from the third-party intellectual property. But for other manufacturers, the high cost of updating boards, support packages, associated drivers when they exist, and applications makes upgrading devices to a whole new version of an operating system extremely difficult. And it is often isn't possible to update even one specific component. As a result, the expectations set by the major software companies don't carry over well to markets where you don't sell as many devices. And there is actually tremendous market pressure to increase earnings. Medical devices aren't smartphones. So that's why this sort of thing might not be perceived as a huge problem in a consumer device market, where manufacturers try to drive a constant hardware upgrade cycle. But there's an expectation that medical devices will be used longer than other devices. They are considered capital expenses, written into construction budgets for new facilities. So, asking medical device vendors to commit to long-term support for components and long-term supply chain support has a corresponding cost that will be borne by the end users. Because of the expense of supporting these devices, actually, many organizations will drop manufacturer support and use a third-party company just to provide the tech support and device management. So this removes the incentive for manufacturers to provide additional support. And medical device vendors don't always have the flexibility to upgrade their underlying platforms because of the way they license components. Since third-party components are usually licensed for a pre-built function, the license may only allow for the devices used with a certain version of an operating system or kernel. While the Linux community has been nothing short of incredible at maintaining older kernel versions and addressing security issues long after newer kernel versions have been released, putting that patched kernel in place actually takes significant work. There are a lot of dependencies between all the parts, and it's very difficult to maintain everything to be able to provide security updates for a particular device or operating system, as well as Microsoft, Apple, or IBM Red Hat to do at scale. And older kernel and library versions mean that newer software isn't going to be as easy to port over and use, if at all. So getting an Apache 2.4 to run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5.x, for instance, this was actually a hard task. No easy fix, overcoming the challenges, and these issues posed to the security of medical devices will be difficult. The FDA, Federal Drug Administration's effort to mandate a software bill of materials through its pre-market cybersecurity guidance is a good standard. It should help to untangle the dependencies of both support packages, kernel updates, associated application builds, and supporting hardware. However, addressing the risks means understanding and addressing the value chain for how a device evolves from a concept to a disposition. We need to also evolve how devices are designed and updated to match the level of support that Samsung and Apple provide. This means there needs to be a dedication by manufacturers to use the platforms for a longer time and a commitment to keeping the build chains current to be able to consistently deliver patches and updates to customers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a technical problem as much as it is a business and supply chain one. We need to communicate and set the expectations with our medical device and IoT vendors that we want to have software support and patches for an expected time period, that we need to make sure that everything on the device is updated. Even the apps and third-party libraries having strong contractual languages to address this is actually very important. We have to be upfront about how long we intend to use these devices for and what our expectations are for security, service levels, and updates. We also need to reduce the variety of the devices. We use and standardize on as few vendors as possible so that we can leverage limited resources and keep these devices in good repair and maintenance. We can also reduce our network attack surface by having fewer vendors accessing devices remotely. Support costs money at all levels, and asking the vendor to make changes for long-term support is going to require financial commitment to do so from both sides. We also need to use that software bill of materials to identify third-party components and contractually ensure that they can be supported like other devices. Eventually, we need to understand that the expectations that Microsoft, Apple, and other large vendors have set for security patches can't be matched by a vendor that makes at most a few 100,000 units of a device. This is a much smaller market that has significantly higher criticality and requires a higher degree of testing. Outside of the major manufacturers, many of the companies that manufacture these devices are much smaller businesses, and they have to be able to afford to develop new devices and support what they have at the same time, which is actually often difficult even for large companies. So the question is how to partner with the medical device vendors to solve issues like the Urgent 11 through better processes. We need to understand how devices work, and we need to understand it takes a lot of work to get a patch out for devices that are more complex than just a standard PC. Deploying patches to these devices also carries very different risks. Mitch Parker is the Chief Information Security Officer for Indiana University Health and Adjunct Professor of Health Informatics at Indiana. And thanks to Mitch for giving this very important news. I really appreciate it. This next news was also extremely interesting, ladies and gentlemen. The scientists built a robot snake that could help in disaster response.
This lab has historically worked on snake robots and more recently on modular robots and walking robots. We look at animals, we try to distill the essential principles, not necessarily copying what we see. You know, a snake robot is never going to be exactly like a real snake. But what we can do is look at how the snake moves around in the world and try to copy some of the basic motion primitives onto our robot, and similarly for the walking robots. But we do then take those principles and apply them on our robot and refine them to get the snakes to go into confined spaces for maybe search and rescue or inspection applications, or to get the walking robot to walk over rough terrain. Snake robots have existed for a long time. Maybe the 1970s was the first snake robot. But they really didn't start to become practical until developments in motor technology and power management started to allow us to package the robot in a form factor that could actually be deployed in the real world. So our snake robots are modular in that they're a long chain of the same repeating actuator down the line. And so what that allows us to do is if one breaks, you can very quickly replace it with a different one. And if you want to change the length of the snake, you can go from 16 modules to 20 to 30, depending on how long of a snake you need for your application. On one end, it has the camera. On the other end, we have a tether that carries power and communications. Once we had this compliant snake robot that's able to feel its way through confined spaces, we had, in the process, committed to a set of modular interfaces, both electrical and mechanical and communications, that allowed us to then not only extend the snake in different forwards and back directions, but actually add different topologies, give it legs, give it arms, give it claws, give it other kinds of modules, wheels. And so that led to the development of this six-legged robot that uses the same technology as the snake, essentially, to walk over rough terrain. What's special about these robots is the proprioceptive force sensing in the legs. They have this force and torque feedback in the legs that allows you to feel your way through rough terrain, walk over rubble without using a lot of sensing. We developed a way to rapidly design gaits, those walking motions for the robot, so that when you change the arms and legs, you are able to quickly deploy it again within minutes. We also have developed a battery-powered version of this robot. The older modules were restricted in that they needed a tether for communication and power, but that was primarily a limitation for the snake robot. On these walking robots, there's more room on board to put batteries, so we're able to put a battery pack and have it walk for an hour or so up rough terrain. This is our battery-powered wireless snake monster. And it is a hexapod that you can change the modules on the end, so you can give it different arms or legs or hands or cameras. Right now we have it configured with 6 legs and a neck camera so that it can reorient the camera to look at broken pipes in a collapsed building. And being battery powered, and we can send it out into the world and go a couple hundred yards with a controller driving from a joystick. There are a few that are now under development. Other companies have kind of commercialized the technology. So there are some that are starting to be used for real-world applications commercially.
So the robot is almost as fast as a real snake and can nimbly and stably climb large steps. The snake robot that mimics its animal counterpart has been very interesting. This robot snake has been developed by the scientists in the race to advance the abilities of search and rescue machines, which is extremely important. You see many earthquakes happening nowadays, and it's very important to use technology to actually able to rescue people. So it is hoped that the robots may someday help to explore inaccessible terrain, such as rubble after an earthquake. Scientists observed how snakes moved and used this information to make a robot that can climb large steps in a nimble and stable fashion. Chen Li, an assistant professor of mechanical engineering at Johns Hopkins University in the United States and a senior author of the research, said, "We look to these creepy creatures for movement inspiration because they are already so adept at stably scaling obstacles in their day-to-day lives. Hopefully, their robot can learn how to bob and weave across surfaces just like the snakes." Robots also are very important nowadays. Actually, robots are becoming surgeons firsthand in first human trials for breast cancer. So at the end, we had looked in some of the previous studies that had mainly looked at snake movements on flat surfaces, but rarely in three-dimension terrain, except for on trees. So Lee said these did not necessarily account for real-life large obstacles, such as pieces of rubble and debris that search and rescue robots would have to scale. Researchers studied how the variable king snake, commonly found in the deserts and pine oak forests, climbed the steps in Lee's Terradynamics labs. Very interesting. So these snakes have to regularly travel across boulders and fallen trees. They are the masters of movement, and there is much we can learn from them, he said. The study has been published in the Royal Society Open Science Journal. Through a series of experiments, it was found that the snakes partitioned their bodies into 3 sections. The front and the rear body of the snake wriggled back and forth on the horizontal steps like a wave, while the middle body section remained stiff, hovering to the bridge the large step. Scientists noticed that the wriggling portions provided the stability to keep the snake from tipping over. As more of the snake reached the step, its front body section would get longer and longer, and its rear section would actually get shorter, while the middle body section really remained roughly the same, to able to suspend and vertically take it about almost 2 steps. So if the steps got taller and more slippery, the snake would move more slowly and wriggle their front and rear body, left to maintain stability. So this team created the robot to mimic the snake's movements. And they say that compared to robots, snakes from other studies, their creation is more stable than all but one, and came close to matching a real snake's speed. But the body suspension system needs to keep the robot stable on large steps. Means the robot uses more electricity and energy. So the animal is still far more superior, but these results are very promising for the field of robots that can travel across large obstacles. I really want to congratulate these scientists for really focusing on helping people who can need these services during earthquakes.
we can make it sneak through very small crevices in order to get access to places where people can't go. And also we can deliver material through the center of it, whether it be a sensor or water, for example, to reach a disaster victim.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is also another end of 5TN. This is your host, Dr. Yavuz Selim Sılay, bringing different technology news and authentic news to you. I wish you the best. Take care. Bye.